Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. Today's video explores an alternate version of events and characters in a reimagined storyline. This presentation is structured and adopted into an audiobook style format with narration and visuals to enhance the experience. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the story.
There was something to be said about sending your two eldest sons to foster. Rickard had wanted to foster when he was a child, to get away from the oppressiveness of Winterfell under his father, to get away and to be free. But as the only child of Edwyle Stark and Marna Locke, that was a luxury that had not been afforded to him, and so he had remained in Winterfell whilst his cousins had gone and done great things in the rest of the north. When he had held Brynden in his arms, after his son had just been born, Rickard had promised himself that his firstborn would not suffer the oppressiveness of Winterfell, and so he had agreed a deal with Lord Tristram Dustin, and Brynden had been fostering with the Dustins since was 6 named days old. Eddard, his second son, had been sent to the Rock in order to get some exposure to the Southerners and their ways. When the time came, Eddard would be the guiding hand behind his brother, for Rickard was no fool. Brynden was too hot-headed, too callous to be able to hold the North and develop it without help. Benjen and Lyanna were just the spares, who would benefit their brothers through the marriages and skills they learned remaining at Winterfell. That much Rickard was sure of. The Lords of the North had not always abided by what it was he had done and stood for, and therefore long ago he had learned to impart a detailed and well-paid spy network across the kingdom, so that he might know exactly what was being said and by who. He would not suffer the same fate as his ancestors. That was why Rickard had asked Master Wallace to meet with him. The Master of Winterfell was a plump man, the bastard of some high tower and a whore of Old Town. He was plump and jovial, but also incredibly smart. Therefore, he was valuable. If he was not smart, Rickard would have had him killed years ago, especially when he learned that Wallace frequented a brothel in Wintertown. Rickard took a deep breath and then looked at the Master, who was stood before him. "What word have you brought from our sources?" A brief silence, and then the Maester spoke. "Lord Umber is arguing with the mountain clans, specifically the Norries. I believe it has something to do with the borders between their lands. Umber believes it spans from the Crow's Den to the Maiden's Rook, whilst Norrie believes that the border lies between Crow's Den and the Giant's Lance." Rickard wished he could have groaned at that. Umber and Norrie quarreling about the border between their lands was an argument as old as the wall itself, he was certain of it. Still, he gestured for Wallace to bring out the map, and once it was unfurled before him on the table, he looked at it in detail. "The markings on this map, how old are they?" "Roughly 20 years old, my lord. Lord Yatlow's the one made them the last time this quarrel erupted," Master Wallace said. Rickard nodded, considering the information. His father had spent a lot of time traveling the north, making sure his own will had been done. It was something Rickard had followed and done as well, but still Norrie and Umber continued to argue. The treaty that Lords Norrie and Umber's fathers signed when this problem last arose. Do you still have them in your collection? The Maester was a strange one in that he kept collections of copies of treaties. The actual things were stored in the old castle. Rickard was unsurprised when Wallace nodded. "I do, my lord." "Good. Send a letter to both Norrie and Umber, inviting them to Winterfell to settle this dispute," Rickard said. He looked down at the map again and sighed. "The border is between Crow's Den and the Lock of Souls. Nothing further than that, otherwise you get onto wall territory." He could already hear the roars of protest coming from both men. The Lock of Souls was not very far from the Crow's Den. In fact, it was about a mile to the south of it. No doubt both men would claim he was being unfair to them both. But it was the only reasonably solution he could come up with. After a moment's pause, Maester Wallace spoke once more. "There are also reports that Lord Raxley Flaw has been expanding southwards at a rate that the Flints are finding incredibly alarming, though they themselves have been expanding westward to the point where the Glovers are growing concerned." Rickard took a deep breath. He'd had expected that from Rizero, no doubt. The fool thought that the fact that Brynden was good friends with his sons meant he could get away with breaking the laws of the land. As for the Flints, well, they were idiots, who were useful puppets in antagonizing the Rizeros. "Send word to our man within the Flint camp. Tell him to remind Lord Flint of the bargain he struck, and that should he go past that bargain there will be consequences." Maester Wallace nodded and Rickard grimaced slightly. He knew just how unpleasant that was going to be. The screams had not died down from the last time still. "Lord Rexwell has also been meeting with members of the Guild of Bankers from the Vale. My lord, He claims it is so that they might give him a loan to redevelop Castle Risewell, but the sources we have there give a contrary claim. Master Wildsley said, "And what claim do they give?" Rickard asked. "They say that he is planning on taking huge loans from the Guild of Bankers to buy out the Flints and the Glovers and take over their holdings, and then when that is done, he plans on marching toward Baraton to take that over as well." Master Waldie said. The way Wildsley's phrased it, Rickard knew that the man thought he'd be surprised by this, but Rickard had known Lord Rioswal for most of his life. He knew how the man thought and operated, and so he was completely unsurprised. "I see. Add on a note for our sources in the Rills. Tell them to keep an eye on anyone who dresses in the clothes and riches of the South. They will know what to do then." Maester Wallis nodded. Lords Karstark and Bolton had been meeting fairly regularly as well. "My lord," no doubt discussing something to do with the construction of the dam at the last river. Both lords seem to think that their prerogatives are being impeded with the construction of the dam, and they are doing their best to discreetly rally the peasantry to support against it. And of course our agents are doing everything they can to thwart their attempts to prevent a good thing from happening. Rickard said. It was not a question. Westeros bowed his head. "Of course, my lord. They are doing everything in their power to make sure that the peasantry remains on board with the construction and to ensure that they get a fully informed view of the benefits and costs of its construction." "Good. I will not allow the short-sightedness of my lords hinder the progress that the North can make. We have potential. Now all we need to do is ensure that it is tapped into and used properly. Otherwise we shall be struggling more than we can possibly imagine." Rickard replied, as expected. Wallis took the bait and asked, "You think that things will be moving quicker in the South than we might like them to?" "Yes. I received word from Tywin, as you know. He told me that the tourney had gone very well, but that there were some amongst the contingent in Loras' party who were unhappy with what was being used," Rickard said. The backwardness of some of the lords really was starting to annoy him. Master Wallis hesitated then. Rickard could see it in the way his hands began to touch his chain and then go still. Eventually, the man spoke. "My lord, not to speak out of turn, but do you think that perhaps the time has come to slow the plans down somewhat? The king is being very receptive. He agreed with the proposal of issuing a trade barrier against Braavos, rather than going to war with them. He has become ever more receptive to Lord Tywin's suggestions, and the influence of Velaryon is falling. Perhaps it would be best to ensure that we do not stray too far." Rickard said nothing for a time. He allowed himself to think through what Wallis had said. Aerys was a changeable man. That much had been clear from the moment Rickard had first met him all those years ago, before Summerhall. The king had grand plans and ideas, but never the patience to truly sit down and implement them. That was why Rickard and Tywin had begun the process. They both suspected that if they laid the groundwork and showed the king that there was an appetite for it, that he would then take it himself and work with it. If they slowed down now, then who knew how much of their work would be undone? If we slow down now, there is nothing preventing Jodiane and Luther Tyrell from banding together and creating something that will damage our ability to change anything. You know just as well as I do that Jon Arryn is not a man to be messed with if he has the advantage. Right now, he is working on the back foot, and I intend to keep it that way." Master Wadses lowered his head in acceptance and then said, "On that note then, my lord, I feel that it is pertinent to inform you that Lord Blackwood has been arguing with Lord Bracken and is planning on using your connection to him to suggest why Bracken should surrender the right to the Tates to him." Rickard snorted. "He means to make me summon my men to fight for him in some battle that will continue until the end of time. I think not. I expect that Ser Brynden will be mentioning that when he meets with me. Brynden Tully, the Blackfish, a good friend of Rickard's but a pain in the arse when talking on business for his brother." "I believe so. Lord Hoster is most desperate for the fighting between Bracken and Blackwood to stop, and from what I can gather he is leaning toward Blackwood succeeding in his quarrel right now." Maester Wallis said, "That does not surprise me. Blackwood is his good brother through their marriages to the Wints. No doubt they will try and get something out of me, so that Hoster does not lose face should I have to get involved." Rickard stated he was not looking forward to that. He despised the Riverlands. It was hot and filled with lords who acted like children. But for what he had planned, they were necessary. Ser Brynden has also come with a portrait of the Lady Catelyn. It would appear that Lord Hoster took your casual interest on behalf of Master Brandon very seriously. Maester Wallace said, a hint of amusement in his voice. Rickard snorted. "Of course he did. Hoster is so desperate to be protected when the war comes that he would barter his children in one fell swoop if he could. No doubt, Brynden will also have something to say about that. Rickard knew very well how protective Brynden was about his family. He had a scar above his right eye to prove it. Master Wallis nodded. Of course, my lord. A pause, and then he asked, Shall I bring Brynden in now, my lord? Rickard nodded. Yes, go ahead. We might as well get this over and done with. Maester Wallis bowed and walked out of the room. He returned shortly with a broad-chested man with an auburn beard and auburn hair, who carried himself like a warrior. Rickard stood and shook the man's hand. Brynden, it is good to see you again. After so many years, old friend. Brynden nodded. You as well, my lord. Rickard sat back down, and Brynden remained standing. So, what is it that you have come to speak to me about? I take it that your brother is not thinking of backing away from what we have planned. It was a feint, he knew. Hoster knew that the man was far too proud and clever to back away from something like this. Brynden shook his head. No, my lord. Hoster is not thinking of standing down from what you have planned, but he does have some concerns about how things shall be carried out, and that is what he has sent me here to talk about. Brynden paused for a moment and then continued. I am sure that you know about the findings of the questionable practices within the Citadel last year. Rickard nodded, and Brynden continued. Well, Hoster has used his sources within the Citadel to find out more. It appears that Grand Maester Paxel has been involved in something of a cover-up of these things. Rickard raised an eyebrow. He had heard rumors, but nothing so bold as this. Your brother is sure of this? Yes. We have reliable sources within the Citadel who have found written evidence that Paxel has been aware of these goings-on within the Citadel for some time, and has actively worked to cover them up, to prevent them from being leaked to the king and the Hand. Brynden stated. Rickard felt slightly sick as he digested this information. And what is it your brother wishes for us to do about this information? Rickard suspected he knew what was going to be said next, but he needed to hear it himself. Hoster wishes for Paxel to be removed from the position of chief counselor to the Hand of the king, and he wants another man put in charge of reading through correspondence of everything to do with what it is you are planning. Brynden replied. Rickard considered the man before him, considered what he had said. This would be difficult to achieve. Tywin believed in Paxel, believed that the man was working for him and their interests, but there was something else there. A hint of doubt in Brynden's voice. That might well be the way to play this. Very carefully, he said. I will write to Tywin and see what can be done. But your brother must bear in mind that Paxel is Lord Tywin's most trusted confidant in King's Landing, and to find someone who could easily replace him and be trusted immediately will be very difficult. As expected, Brynden produced a piece of paper and handed it to Rickard. As Rickard read through the paper, Brynden spoke. That is a list of all the potential replacements for Paxel that my brother thinks can be trusted. Rickard read through the paper and then folded it. Has a similar list been sent to Lord Tywin? Yes, Brynden said. My brother wishes for things to be as smooth as possible, but there are concerns, justifiable concerns in light of what has been discovered about Paxel, that he might be more compromised than we had thought. Rickard waved a hand to show he recognized that. He took a moment to think and then said, These candidates your brother has recommended, how thoroughly have they been tested for their ability to remain loyal and withstand all kinds of questioning? That was important. If there was even a slither of doubt, then they could not be used. Rickard would not endanger the mission. Brynden smiled. Very thoroughly tested, my lord. Hoster has left no stone unturned to find out who can and cannot be trusted beyond the measures of River Run. Rickard nodded. Very well then, I shall take a deeper look at this list, and then I shall make my recommendations accordingly. He paused for a moment and then said, Now about this business with the Brackens and the Blackwoods. What exactly is it that your brother expects me to do? Nothing, my lord. Hoster wants you to not get involved. Of course, if you feel that you have no choice but to get involved, then Hoster will recognize that, but he would prefer it if you did not. Brynden said. Rickard was surprised by this. He had thought that Hoster being Hoster would want some help dealing with two of his most troublesome bannermen, but clearly he had misjudged things. Keeping his face a blank mask, he replied, Very well, I do not intend to get involved. Blackwood might be my cousin, but I have not met the man for many years, and whatever quarrel he has with Bracken is not mine to fix. Brynden nodded his acceptance. A wise policy to have, my lord. There was silence for a few moments, and then Sarah Brynden added, I have brought a portrait of my niece, Lady Catelyn, as per your request. She is a fine young lady and is learning all she can about the North. Rickard smiled. That is good, and I can assure you that Brynden is learning about River Run and the proud history of House Tully as well. To ensure that he knows more about his betrothed, that was a lie. Rickard knew, for a fact, that Brynden had not bothered reading anything that Rickard had asked him to read. And truth be told, he was not all that surprised. His eldest son was not one for reading. Sarah Brynden smiled as well. Very well, if you may excuse me, my lord. It has been a long day, and I would like some rest. Rickard gestured for the man to go, and said, Of course, Sarah. It was bloody hot today. Summer had decided to make its presence felt, and as such, Joanna had ordered the servants to constantly rotate fan-waving duties as well as for the windows to all be open. Still, she was sweating, as were the children. They were drinking lots of cold water and other cold drinks. Joanna shrugged slightly and felt a bead of sweat drop down her skin. She stood up and walked out of her room, past servants who looked how she felt. She nodded to them and continued on her way. There was no need to stop. She knew what needed to be done, and she was determined to see it done. Her boys were going to King's Landing in a week's time, and whilst they were both very excited, Joanna knew they were nervous. Jamet because it would be the first time that he'd be away from his mother, and Eddard because he did not know how to dance. To reassure both boys, she had decided that she would teach them how to dance. The dances they'd be expected to dance at court. As Cersei was feeling quite jealous about not being able to, Joanna had agreed to let her attend the lesson as well. Joanna smiled as she came to the ballroom, where she saw Eddard stumbling slightly over his feet as he tried to guide Cersei through a dance. She coughed lightly, and the children straightened. Joanna felt her lips quirk upwards. Children, I am glad to see that you are already practicing. She moved into the room properly and came to stand in the center of the room in front of the children. Joanna took a breath. Now there are 3 main dances that are danced in King's Landing. They are the Dragon's Jig, the Stag's Waltz, and the Lion's Shuffle. They are all fairly easy dances to learn and to do, but you must learn the correct forms before you go off to King's Landing. Do you understand? The children nodded, and Jaime asked, Why is it that the jig is called the Dragon's Jig, Mama? Joanna smiled. Because Queen Alysanne the Good was the one who invented it to commemorate her wedding to her brother, King Jacaerys. Yanni nodded. Joanna spoke once more. Now, which dance would you like to learn first? Unanimously, the children said. The Dragon's Jig. Joanna hid a laugh behind her hand. It was a good choice, and would be an easy one to start with. Very well, Eddard. Would you come forward, please? Eddard looked quite surprised at being chosen, but walked forward to stand before her. Good. Now we bow. She bowed, as did Eddard. Now turn to your side. Eddard turned, and she turned. Extend your right hand. The boy did so, and Joanna placed her left hand in his. Now we move 3 steps forward, hop and then walk back 2 steps. They moved. Eddard was good at this. They hopped and then walked back. Now we turned to face one another. Joanna could see nervousness in her foster son's eyes, and she smiled softly to reassure him. Now raise your hand and twirl me. Her foster son did so, and though she was slightly taller than him, it wasn't too bad. He smiled in relief when she came back to her original position, unharmed. Now that is the Dragon's Jig. The music will be quite fast when you perform this dance, so you need to be in time. Damon, she called, and her cousin came out with the band. Start the music. Her cousin obliged, starting an upbeat jig. Joanna turned to Eddard and said, Now take a breath and let us begin. They moved calmly, though she could tell there were times when Eddard was slightly nervous. He managed well enough, and where he stumbled, Joanna was there to guide him properly. They danced 3 times before Joanna signaled for the music to stop. Very good, Eddard. You're a natural. Her foster son blushed at that. Now do you want to try Yame? Her son nodded enthusiastically. Yes, please, Mama. Joanna grinned at her son, took his hands in hers, and began the dance to the sound of music. Yame was slightly clumsy. Once or twice he stood on her toes, but the longer they practiced, the better he got, and he was never disheartened by the fact that he didn't get it right the first time. He smiled and laughed, and Joanna smiled and laughed alongside him, glad to see her boy having so much fun. Eventually she stopped dancing with Jaime and took a turn with Cersei. As expected, her daughter was perfect at the dance. After 3 goes with Cersei, Joanna called a halt to the dance. All of them were sweating slightly, despite the open windows. Now, the next dance is the Stag's Waltz. This dance is a quick one, as well, but not as quick as the Dragon's Jig. Jaina, could you come here? Joanna stated. Her son came and stood next to her, looking up at her eagerly. Now, we bow before one another. They bowed and then straightened. Take both our hands and place them in each other's. They did so. Now, when the music starts, we move to the left 2 steps and stamp our feet and then back to our starting position. Then we move out from one another and then move back in and repeat. They followed what she said once, and Jaina giggled when he accidentally stood on her toe. She smiled and then said, again. They did it a second time, and this time it was better. Now, with the music, the beat came in quickly, a groove that had always made Joanna's heart quicken. Jaina kept pace with her, his enthusiasm contagious. They moved and swayed through the hall once, twice, thrice, a 4th time, and then Joanna called a halt. Very good, Jaina. Eddard, do you wish to have a go? There was a slight delay before Eddard nodded his head. He stepped forward and locked hands with her. Slowly they followed the routine without music. Eddard stepped on her toes a few times, and she could feel the sweat on his palms. Just relax, Eddard. Take a deep breath and relax, she said. After a minute or so, she felt the tension in him ease, and they finally got the hang of the dance without music. She took a quick glance at Eddard, saw that he was smiling, and then searched the room for Daemon. When she found him, she nodded, and the music started. A quick tempo, filled with energy and memories of her youth. They moved in and out and side to side, gliding and glancing around one another. Once he had relaxed, Eddard was a good dancer. The few times he seemed to think too much, he stepped on her toes. But she brushed the slight pain off with a smile. They danced a few times. And then Joanna signaled for the music to stop. Eddard smiled shyly and moved off to the side to stand next to Jaime. Cersei came forward and Joanna danced with her daughter. Once again, her daughter was a natural, smooth, flowing, and graceful. Joanna felt proud dancing with her daughter and briefly wished that she could keep her children at this age forever, and to not send 2 of her boys off to King's Landing. The music stopped, and Joanna gave up her idle thoughts. Cersei stayed with her, though, because this dance required 2 girls and 2 boys. She gestured for the boys to come forward, which they did slightly reluctantly. Now this dance is called the Lion's Shuffle. It was invented by Lord Tygett Lannister to ease the homesickness of his wife Viola Targaryen. It involves 2 boys and 2 girls linking arms and moving 1 step forward and then 1 step back, before spinning around the hall and then repeating the initial moves. The music here is slightly fast and slightly slow. Do you think you can manage? Yes, all 3 children said in unison. Joanna laughed. Very well then. They linked hands and tried the movements without music. There was a slight mess up toward the bit where they would spin around. Eddard mistimed his spin and ended up falling, followed shortly by Cersei. Cersei giggled and so did Eddard. They got back up and tried again. This time Jaime fell and Joanna felt herself fall as well. Jaime giggled and Joanna smiled. Eventually they picked themselves up off the floor and linked hands again. They moved forward, backward, forward again, and then they turned. This time none of them fell, and Cersei cheered, and Jaime giggled. Eddard smiled. Joanna felt her heart grow full. They tried it again and got it right. A 3rd time. Eddard missed his step and fell over before getting up and carrying on. The music came in, first the mandolin, then the strings, and Joanna was taken back to her childhood growing up in King's Landing and the Rock, dancing with Tywin and Aerys and Stefan, enjoying the feeling of being loved and loving in return. The boys she had known had grown up into men, one who ruled the realm, the other who reigned in the third. Well, Stefan had never been the same since Summerhall, and Cassandra did not say what had changed. Joanna looked at her children, and she hoped they would never have to feel the pain that she and Tywin had had to feel, that they could be spared the pain of war, of broken loves and torn hearts. While she might not like that Jaime and Eddard were going to King's Landing, that they were to be squiring for Tywin was some relief. It meant that they would not be left to the dogs that stalked the halls of the Red Keep. That was a relief in of itself. No matter how small. She shook her head slightly, tuning back into the music. She could not let her furs catch up with her now and ruin what should be a perfect last week for her children here in their home. Joanna hoped Eddard saw the Rock as his home. She did not want it to replace Winterfell. She did not think it could, but she also wanted him to feel like he belonged here. She knew what it was like to feel adrift in the biggest castles in the land. She had had Tywin and Raziella to ease her way through the pain in those early days. She hoped Eddard knew he had friends and family, people who loved him and cared for him here. She looked at her children and smiled at the joy on their faces. They spun around one more time, and then the music died. Joanna stepped back and said, "Now, you three shall show me what you have learned. We shall start with the dragon's jig. Eddard. Cersei, go first." Eddard and Cersei bowed before one another and took the other's hand. They might quite a nice couple, if Joanna said so herself. Eddard was taller than Cersei, and she looked quite snug, nestled next to him. They danced, and neither stepped a foot wrong in time to the music, though as the music slowed down, Eddard almost tripped up in his haste to finish, causing him to blush furiously and for Cersei to giggle. Eddard giggled along with her, and Joanna breathed a sigh of relief. The music stopped. Eddard and Cersei bowed to one another, and then Jaime came and danced with Cersei. As she watched her twins dance, Joanna could see the connection that was there between them, but she hoped and prayed that it was simply sibling connection and nothing more. They could not allow it to be anything more. The music slowed down and eventually stopped before entering the music for the Stag's Waltz. Jaime and Cersei danced first for this one and looked a pure sight, all arms and legs and frantic movement. It was quite amusing, for they were both quite competitive, and it was obvious they were trying to outdo one another. So much so that at one point they tripped over each other's feet and sprawled to the floor. They were silent. The music kept playing. Then they got up and giggled a little, then continued. The music slowed down to a gentle beat, and as Joanna looked at the twins, she was reminded of how Daemon had danced with her at her wedding to Tywin, and she breathed a sigh of relief. The dances continued for the next hour or so, as the day got cooler. The wind started to pick up, and it stopped being so damnably hot. Joanna watched with pride and amusement as her children, for they were all her children, including Eddard, danced and twirled and joked. The music was soothing. It helped her forget the troubles that were plaguing her and allowed her to enjoy the cheer and joy her children were getting from learning how to dance. Eventually, a servant came and informed her of the time, and she clapped her hands. The music stopped. Her children protested, but she silenced them with a look. "It is time for your lessons. Jaime Cersei, you are to go to Maester Krazelin, Eddard to Tyget." "But Mama, we're having so much fun dancing. Do we have to go to lessons?" Jaime asked, his eyes going round. Joanna pretended to be frustrated. "Janie, you know what we discussed and how important it is that you attend your lessons. You don't want to let your papa down, do you?" Jaime's eyes expanded. "No, Mama, of course not. Mama, would we be able to come and dance later tonight, though?" "I don't see why not," Joanna replied. "Yay," Jaime squealed. He rushed forward and wrapped his arms around her waist, hugging her tightly. Jaina laughed. "Well, go on. Go to your lessons, all of you." Joanna replied. Yagain pulled back and nodded enthusiastically. "Yes, Mama." Joanna watched as her children hurried off to their lessons, a heavy sensation in her chest. They really were growing up too quickly. Joanna stood for a moment, remembering memories of dancing with her father and mother before they had both died, of singing songs and laughing at bad jokes, of the grim atmosphere when the Rains and Tarbecks had dared raise their heads and their tails at the Lion of the Rock. So many memories were coming back to haunt her now, and she did not know why. Well, actually, that was a lie. She understood perfectly well why. A hand ran through her hair, then she moved away from the ballroom. She turned around corners and narrow hallways. The wind had picked up speed now. She could hear it howling outside. She shivered slightly, and breathed a sigh of relief when she entered the study. Her study. Kevin was there waiting for her, as was the wet nurse with Tyrion, the youngest of her children, who was small and stunted, but still beautiful. She took the babe from the wet nurse and balanced him in her arms, as she sat down, and then she placed him on her knee. "Mama," Tyrion babbled, smiling and chattering away about something or the other. Eventually he fell silent, and Joanna looked at Kevin. "There have been more sightings," her good brother said, without preamble. "In the same areas?" she asked. "Yes, and always at the same time, around the lowest peak of the sun and the beginning of the moon's entrance into the sky, and there are varying numbers, sometimes 5, sometimes 10, sometimes more. They display no colors, and none of the men have been able to hear what they say clearly. But it is clear something is being planned," Kevin replied. Joanna sighed. "What do you think it is that they are doing?" The rumors had first come to them from one of Gerion's associates. A torn and tattered old man who had forgotten more about the Westerlands than anyone else alive knew or remembered. I think they are planning something serious, something that might well be in connection to whatever it is Tywin is planning with Lord Stark, Kevin replied. Joanna knew Kevin did not quite appreciate being left in the dark about that, but it was necessary. The fewer people who knew right now, the less chance there was of it getting out and causing trouble later. I am not so sure. I think they might well just be trying to cause a stir, to cause fright. Everyone remembers what happened the last time someone went there. Joanna said, the old murmurs who had ventured near the well where Tainchen Tarbeck had stood his ground and fought. It was old and haunted, but nobody went there and survived. True, but these people are not like the others. They are there almost constantly, and they do not seem scared of the reputation the place has. Kevin said, and Joanna was surprised. Was that a hint of fear she heard in his voice? Joanna considered this. Well, until they actually do something that is worthy of drawing a proper reaction, all we can do is wait and watch. No matter how much I do not like it. She did not want these people, whoever they were, staying where they were for too long. Such a thing would attract attention, and attention never ended well. Do you still wish for Jaime and Eddard to leave for King's Landing in a week? If these people are still there in a week, they will be a beacon for troublemakers. Kevin stated. Joanna considered it for a moment, then shook her head. They must go to King's Landing. If they do not, then people will talk, and if people talk, they will soon learn about these others. We cannot tell that, double or triple the guard, though. That would not raise as many eyebrows, for the heir to the rock, to travel to the capital, requires as many. Kevin nodded, stood up and bowed. He straightened and left. Once he was gone, Joanna felt Tyrion tug on a lock of her hair. She looked down at him and listened, surprised, when he said, Bad men come, Mama. Bad men come. She remembered the last time she had heard that exact phrase, and shuddered. Ned had to keep blinking to remind himself that this was actually happening, that he was in King's Landing again to serve as a squire for Lord Tywin Lannister. The journey from the rocks to the capital had been something else. This time there were nerves and anticipation inside of him. Yaxley had cried slightly when they had left the rock and gotten into the carriage, but had quickly stopped when Ned had explained that now they could play all the games that they wanted, and no one would ever tell them no. At least until they got to King's Landing, and so they had played all the games they would never think to play in the rock. Blind Man's Bluff, Chancer, Monkey's Tail, and a countless host of others that had passed the time until they had made it into the city, where Lord Tywin had greeted them with a sizable retinue. Dressed in gold and red, Lord Tywin had looked every inch a noble lord, and in some of his more treasonable moments of thought, Ned thought the hand of the king looked more like a king than the king himself had done. The welcome feast had been good. Getting to meet Arthur and Aelia and Ashara again had been fun. They had caught up on everything that the others had done. Learning about the snake trail they had discovered in King's Landing and in the King's Forest was something else entirely, and Ned was not entirely sure whether to believe them or not. Ned had told them about his name day and had gotten some cheers and wishes from them, and a kiss on the cheek before going to bed from Ashara that had made him smile. It still made him smile now. Now, however, the festivities were over for a brief period. Lord Tywin's main squire, Tai Asbrax, was showing them what their duties would be as squire for the second most powerful man in the kingdoms. Brax was 2 years older than Ned, and he was tall, muscular, with a crop of silvery golden hair that made Ned wonder who his mother or grandmother was. He was also something of an annoyance. His tone was slightly grating. Ned looked at Jaime and saw that his foster brother was staring at Brax, a mixture of awe and fear on his face that grated on Ned even more. Now Lord Tywin is a very demanding master. As his squires, you will be expected to fill his wine cup with either wine or water depending on what he prefers at the time. You will be expected to wait on him hand and foot to be ready to prepare anything he wants from you at a moment's notice. This could be getting important papers from his room in the Tower of the Hand to filing away the same papers into alphabetical order, all without looking deeply into the contents. A strange look crossed Brax's face then, and Ned got the sense that the older boy had looked at the contents and gotten a bollocking for doing so. The thought made Ned grin before he smoothed over his face. Brax continued. You will also be expected to help Lord Tywin dress. He likes to dress quickly, with minimal fuss. This is especially true if there is a feast of some importance taking place. There was a moment's pause as if Brax was wanting to emphasize just how important his own role was. As the Hand's chief squire, Ned just felt contempt for him. Now I shall show you where everything is kept and how to store it back in its place when the hand of the king is done with it. Brax moved from his place toward a chest of drawers. The drawers had carvings of lions and dragons on them, and Ned knew what this was. This was what had been given to Lady Vala upon her marriage to Lord Taggart Lannister. Many years ago, it was a priceless piece of furniture, and it did not surprise him that Lord Tywin had it. Brax opened the first drawer and said, "In this drawer, Lord Tywin keeps his papers. They are arranged according to importance, and the day they will be needed." "I thought you said Lord Tywin filed his papers in alphabetical order," Ned asked. Brax gave him a withering look. "He does, but these are papers that are meant for council meetings only." "You could have led with that," Ned replied. Brax snorted. "Regardless, these papers are kept in order of how they are to be received." He gestured to papers on his left-hand side. "These papers here are the papers Lord Tywin will be using today. They are filed alphabetically, depending on the agenda of the council." He gestured to papers in the middle. "These are the papers that Lord Tywin will need at different points during the week. They are filed according to importance." Finally, he gestured to the papers on the right. "And these are the papers that he does not need, and will not need again." Ned nodded and saw Shane do the same. A look of worry crossing his face. Brax opened the second drawer. Ned saw clothes of all sorts folded neatly and kept according to color. Brax gestured at once. Morning wear, afternoon wear, and evening wear. Seeing the looks of surprise on their faces, Brax snorted. Court etiquette dictates that all members of the small council wear more than one set of clothes throughout the day, to ensure that they are properly representing the king. The drawer closed, the one beneath it open. Ned stared. There were pins and badges, as well as small daggers. The hand's weapons drawer. These weapons are small and blunted, but we are expected to polish them. The drawer closed, and then Brax opened a fourth drawer, before closing it. "What's in there?" Jaime asked, immediately. "Nothing. I was not supposed to open that," Brax said, a hint of fear in his voice. "Come, let us move from here and you can ask me whatever questions you might have." Brax moved, his long legs carrying him further than either Ned or Jaime on their shorter legs could realistically hope to keep pace with. Eventually Brax stopped and Ned noticed they were stood in another room. How they had gotten into this room he did not know, but here they were. Brax stared at them, and they him. Ned was not sure what to ask. He didn't have many questions apart from finding out what was in that drawer. Jaime for once didn't have any questions either. His foster brother was surprisingly silent. As the silence dragged on, Ned decided to speak. "What time does Lord Tywin normally wake, and where are we to spend the evening hours?" Ned knew that junior squires were not meant to spend every waking hour with their masters. That was the role of senior squires. Lord Tywin wakes up around the first light of dawn, and when you are not on duty, you sleep in your own quarters. Brax responded. Ned nodded. Brax spoke once more. "Very well. If you have no more questions, I must be off. Lord Tywin is expecting me." Tydos nodded his head and then turned on his heel and walked out of the room, leaving Ned and Jaime alone. The moment Brax was gone, Ned turned to Jaime and asked him, "Are you okay? You've been awfully quiet." His foster brother was silent. His lips pursed, then suddenly a torrent of words broke forth. I do not know, but there's something about him that doesn't seem right." "What do you mean?" Ned asked. Jaime might be young, but he was usually quite good with getting the hand on people, as he had demonstrated before when they were in the Rock. "I mean, he just seems so very silly. He seems like a puffed-up tortoise." Jaime replied, grinning. Ned couldn't help but laugh. "I'm sure that he's just feeling important, showing the heir to the Rock what his duties will be as a squire to his father." Jaime nodded, but Ned could tell he was not quite convinced. Thankfully, his foster brother did not linger long on it. Instead, he said, "Shall we go and find Arthur? I know he would be free right about now." "Sure," Ned said, ignoring the slight pang in his chest. For some reason, Jaime's friendship and near-hero worship of Arthur worried him. They walked out of the room, down through alcoves and more halls. There were a lot of halls in the Tower of the Hand. They walked out of the tower and onto the path. Along the path they walked, silent strangely enough. Jaime didn't seem in the mood for talking, which was odd in itself, but Ned took the silence and continued walking. After what seemed like an age, they arrived at the Red Keep proper. They nodded to the guards and entered. As expected, Arthur was there waiting for them, and so was the prince. Prince Rakier was dressed in green, not the traditional red and black that he normally wore. He smiled when he saw them. Jaime, it is good to see you again. Arthur mentioned that he was meeting you both. I hope you do not mind if I join you. Casterly looked at Ned and Ned shook his head. Not at all, your royal highness. The prince smiled. Excellent. So, shall we venture outwards? Ned and Amy nodded, and Ned noticed that Sergeant Derry was standing behind the prince in ever-present shadow. It made him wonder what Martin was doing. His father had summoned Martin back to Winterfell before he left for King's Landing. And so Roderick Wool had taken up the reins as his sworn sword. Roderick was a good man, silent as anything, though. They walked away from the entrance, a door opened for them as guards bowed their heads to the crown prince. Another door opened, and then they were in what Ned had seen referred to as the inner sanctum. It was a large hall with banners of dragons, black, red, green, white, and gold. There were paintings of the different kings and queens and their families. It was a fascinating place, and Ned really wanted to see more of it. The prince spoke then. Arthur, why don't you and Jaime go to the Hall of Swords? Yes, your royal highness, Arthur said, and he and Jaime had disappeared down another hallway. Ned watched them and wondered what was in the Hall of Swords, and then found his attention drawn back to the paintings and the banners. They're beautiful, aren't they? The prince asked softly. Yes, Ned whispered. How many are there? His gestured. There seemed to be a lot of them on the walls, but at the same time, not nearly as many as he thought there might be. Roughly around 30, from before the Doom till now, the prince said. There are 30 paintings here, Ned asked, astonished. But it doesn't seem as though the room can take that many, doesn't it? The prince asked. Ned turned and saw that the prince was smiling. Yes, how is it possible for it to hold 30? Ned queried. The prince clapped his hands then and the walls shifted, expanding, changing, molding into something much bigger. When the prince clapped his hands again, the walls stopped, and there before them were more paintings and drawings. Like that, the prince replied, smiling. How? Ned stuttered. What? The prince smiled. When Aegon the Dragon built the Red Keep, or Aegon Fort as it was called then, he imbued a little of Valyria into the walls. That foundation stood through the tearing down of the fort, and its reconstruction as the Red Keep. He ensured that as it stood firm, so too could the descendants of his blood replenish and revitalize the walls and the very foundation of his conquest. And so, there are many such things within the Red Keep. Ned's eyes widened. He took in the wall with the elaborate paintings and drawings and tried to place that with what he'd just been told. Wow, it felt insufficient. Wow was not the right word, but what the right word was, he did not know. The prince's mouth widened into a grin. Do you want to see the paintings up close? Ned's eyes widened. I really can. That is allowed. I had read that the paintings were off limits to everyone apart from the immediate royal family. Your Royal Highness, even as he said the words, he knew how silly they sounded, considering who he was with. The prince laughed, a musical sound. Well, you are with the Crown Prince of Westeros, Eddard. I am sure nobody will mind. So, come now. Let us look at these paintings and see what they tell us. The prince moved forward to a painting with two dragons locked in a fierce stare at one another. One was bronze and the other was silver. Eddard looked at the dragons and whispered, Vermithor and Silverwing, the dragons of King Daenerys and Queen Alysanne. They look really angry. Indeed they do. This was during one of their famous quarrels. I believe it was around the time Prince Aegon, their firstborn son, died, Prince Rhaegar said, his voice sounding sad. I thought Prince Aemon was their firstborn, Eddard asked, his voice uncertain. Well, most history books include him as their firstborn child, but this was only ever done at King Jaehaerys' request. You see, Prince Aegon was a most wild of princes. He did whatever he pleased and did not care about the consequences. He was a smart and intelligent child and a good warrior, but he was dangerous, the prince explained. Prince Aegon sounded a lot like Brynden. Why was he dangerous? Ned asked. Here the prince's voice took on a slightly heavy quality. Prince Aegon did not like the faith. He saw them as zealots who were only cowed after exacting heavy concessions from the king and his wife. There was much and more that was wrong in the relationship between the Iron Throne and the faith. Much that was lurking underneath the surface. Prince Aegon wanted to eradicate the cancerous hierarchy of the faith and ensure that only the king was answerable to the Seven and nobody else. He incited riots against the faith. He incited disruptions, and because he was a good speaker, everybody followed. There was a threat to the peace that King Jaehaerys had worked so hard to build, and so, when Prince Aegon was out riding one night, his horse stumbled and fell over a pass of rock that had never been there before. His neck broke, and he died. When the king and queen found out about this, they grieved, and then they argued. Why did they argue? Ned asked. He could understand the grief he had grieved when Mother had died. Because King Jacaerys went on with life, he met with Septon Barth and he arranged it so that nobody focused on Prince Aegon. Everyone moved on to the new heir, the prince. He made it so that everybody forgot about his firstborn son, Ned asked, horrified. Why? Prince Rickard looked at the painting and then at Ned, his eyes filled with sadness. Because it was easier that way. The faith would get off his back. They would not pester him to do something about his heir. When his heir was the now devout Prince Ivan, all would be well, and they were happy with that. Queen Atsan was not, and so their dragons snarled at one another. Ned could not comprehend that. It was almost like if something happened to Brynden and then Father rewrote history. Father would never do that. Father loved Brynden too much to ever do that. He had kept Brynden in the north and sent Ned away. But they made up in the end, did they not? He asked. Yes, they did. Eventually, Queen Aesiane moved on with life and ensured that Prince Aemon was well and a good and proper heir for Westeros. And in time, she forgot about her firstborn, but she never allowed his memory to be forgotten, Prince Rhaegar said. Ned wanted to ask what he meant, but then his attention was caught by a portrait of a great beast. He walked over to it and asked, Is this Balerion? The Black Dread was legend. The prince shook his head. No, that is the Black Dread's sire, Golgoth. Ned stared at the painting. The beast was black and red, and was twice no thrice, no, maybe even larger than that. He was certainly bigger than Balerion, or the images that Ned had seen of the Black Dread. Why is it none of the books mention him? The prince smiled. Because they do not wish to think about what happened before the conquest. Balerion is what they wish to teach. Not Golgoth. I'm not sure I understand, Your Royal Highness, Ned replied. His mind was racing. Golgoth looked huge. The Black Dread was young during the conquest, and was huge then. Golgoth looked old, but he was not sure. Golgoth knew more about art than he did. Balerion represents the Targaryen dynasty as it was seen through the eyes of the Westerosi. New, fresh, a change, and frightening. Golgoth was a monster, a true beast worthy of the name. He was everything the Targaryens were, and were meant to be, the prince said. Ned hesitated, but the Targaryens were lesser nobles in Valyria. The prince looked at Ned and smiled secretly. Do not always believe everything you read by masters, Eddard. They write what they want you to know, not what you ought to know. What do you mean? Ned asked. The prince did not reply immediately, and when he did, Arthur and Jaime were returning. The prince turned to them and said, Come, let us make our way back to the castle proper. The feast will be happening soon. They left the inner sanctum, and Ned had more questions than he knew what to do with. There was something different about King's Landing now. Gone were the celebrations, replaced by a serious atmosphere. Gone were the smiles and the laughter, replaced by serious expressions that did more to confuse than anything else. Jaime did not know what it was, what had changed in the time since he had last been here, but King's Landing was different. Maybe it was because Mama was not here. Mama always made the room brighter. She always made people smile and laugh, especially Papa. But she was not here. She was still in the rock with Cersei and Tyrion. And Papa was more serious now. He rarely smiled, and Jaime didn't like it. Still, he had his duties, and he was going to do them properly. Right now, when Papa was not meeting with lords or officials, that meant listening to him talk about what it meant to be a great lord. Ned was there, as was Brax. Jaime focused as Papa spoke. In order to make the lords of the realm respect you, you must never appear as though you are desperate for their approval. You must never fawn and gape at something they say. You must always greet it with polite indifference. You must make sure that they want to tell you more, that they feel they have to tell you more. You must never come across as if you are begging for them to tell you more. Jaime nodded because he saw Ned nod, but he was not sure he understood what Papa meant. What he was saying sounded an awful lot like lying, and Mama said lying was bad. Ned asked a question, as he always did. What happens if the person you are talking to is not a lord, but a lady? Could they not suss out the truth quicker than an average lord? That was an odd question to ask, Jaime thought, but Papa seemed to appreciate it. There was a smile on his face. A good question, however. Not every lady you meet is like Lady Joanna. Many ladies have air in their heads and not enough sense to form a more coherent thought than to twitter away about the latest gossip. The few ladies that you meet who are not like that will either have ensured you never know that they are different, or you will be dead by the time you realize they are different. Yosi felt vaguely horrified by that prospect. Well, it is a good thing there is only one woman like Mama then, and that's Mama. Papa's smile widened. Indeed. There was a brief pause, and then Papa spoke once more. Now, in the time you have squired for me, you are sure to have heard a lot. Tell me what is the most interesting thing you have heard. Tinas Brax spoke first, his voice filled with some odd mix of awe and disgust. When Lord Merryweather came to speak to you about the grain produce, there was an angle he was trying to get across, but I am not sure he even knew what that angle was. Papa smirked. Lord Merryweather is a bumbling fool who says more than he can truly mean and does not appreciate the fact that his position is weaker than it has ever been. What would you have done had he come to you with that proposition? Brax's face scrunched up, and Jaime got the impression that he was like one of those cows who had eaten something particularly unpleasant. I would have told him that his proposition was unreasonable, and with the tension with Brovs not realistic, there was a brief silence and Jaime thought Papa might approve. The thought made him oddly jealous, and then Papa sighed. A blunt approach, and that might work with some in the Westerlands. But it would not work here. Merryweather is a fool. Yes, but he is a fool who has friends who are powerful. One must massage people like that's ego, make them see where their errors are without directly pointing them out. State something such as, "It is a good thought and one that deserves more consideration." Do not say, "It is a terrible idea and will never be done." That makes you appear far too negative and will never engender the man to come and speak again. Meaning you miss out on when he comes up with something common sense. Brax nodded, and then Ned spoke. I found the petitions of the Devout Brotherhood to be most interesting. I find it odd how such a fanatical order is tolerated, given the history between the throne and the faith. Yaxley listened, then. He had been there when the Devout Brotherhood had come and asked Papa something to do with lowering the tariffs for book publishing. Papa had not been happy. One look at Papa now, and Jaime could see he still was not happy. The Devout Brotherhood has more devotion in it than common sense, I fear. They came to ask something that they knew would never get done, and I think that was part of their plan. How so? Ned asked. The Devout Brotherhood come from a time when there was little to nothing happening between the faith and the throne. There was no dialogue, for King Migor was destroying everything that could possibly have been used as dialogue. Instead, they were forming and they were reinforcing their position. Now, however, they are weakening, and they wish to change that. The king would never give them the tools to change their position, and he is right to do so. Radicals are dangerous to the natural order, Papa said. Jaime saw that Ned had a thoughtful expression on his face, and had no doubt that later on, when they were done here, his foster brother would be looking into the Devout Brotherhood more. How Ned had the time to read so much with everything else they had to do, Jaime did not know. Still, there was one thing that had stood out to Jaime. Why did Saragerald come to speak to you about the Band of Nine, Papa? That had been something he had found most curious. The Band of Nine had died out long ago, before Jaime had been born, before Papa and Mama had ever married. He could not see why they would still be a concern. A strange look crossed over Papa's face, and his voice was softer than it had been before. They are a remnant from a past age, it is true, but they are still relevant today. There are those who would bring down the natural order, and as such, the Lord Commander merely wanted to discuss the things we had heard before we presented them to the king. Yadye nodded. That was not really an answer he understood or cared about. But still, what is the Lord Commander like? He had heard a great many things about the Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, the White Bull, the man who had defeated 7 men in one go during the Bracken Rebellion, the man who had kept the Golden Company fighting into the sea during the War of the Ninepenny Kings, the man who had protected Queen Betha from assailants during the Rebel War. He was a legend, and Yadye never knew what to say when he stood before him. Papa's smile had softened out then, the lines on his face looked less menacing. He is a good man, a brave man, dedicated and devoted. He knows everything there is to know about fighting, about commanding in war, and about being a loyal servant to the crown. There was a pause, and Papa's eyes widened and then went down again. Hammer did not know what to make of that, and was surprised when Papa said, "Right, well, Tydos remain here. Eddard, Hammer, you have sparring practice to attend." Usually Papa kept them till the very last moment before they needed to go off to sparring practice, and so it was with a little reluctance that James stood up and walked out of the room with Ned. His thoughts drifted back to the Rock and Mama, and he felt a sharp pang in his side. It was silly, really. Mama was in the Rock, and he wrote to her every so often and got letters from her every so often. It wasn't like his mama was dead, unlike Ned's mama, and so he kept quiet about it and fought hard to keep the thoughts of missing home and the smell of baked bread and the sound of mama singing away from his mind. It was hard work, but eventually they got to the training yard, a big round arena covered in sand and chalk. Yamsag and Ned smiled at one another before moving to grab wooden training swords from the stockroom. Sarah saw Sir Thorne, the master of arms at the Red Keep, smiled at them, and Jaime was happy to see that Arthur was there alongside Garth Hightower. "Right, Garth? Jaime, show me what you've got," Sir Azir called out. Jaime and Garth moved out into the middle of the arena. Swords in hand, they lowered their heads to one another and then straightened. Garth was a bit bigger than Jaime, but Jaime knew he was quicker. They circled one another. Jaime could feel the blood rushing in body. He was excited by this prospect. He saw an opening on Garth's right-hand side, and lunged. Garth parried the blow away and danced back, and then forward, swinging to his left. Jaime managed to dodge the blow and bring his sword up in time to block another swing. Garth came again, a feint to the right, and then a swing straight for the center. Jaime blocked and then pushed forward with all his might. Garth teetered a little off balance, and Jaime used that to his advantage. He swung and dipped his sword, slicing at Garth, nicking him in the side, before bringing his sword up and clipping Garth's nose. Garth retaliated with a series of brutal swings that forced Jaime onto the back foot. He ducked, weaved, and dodged. But Garth came at full force, and Jaime knew he would not be able to last much longer. Garth kept pressing and pressing. Jaime felt his arms grow tired and sore from constantly defending, and then he saw it. Every time Garth went for him, he left his left side open. Jaime thought quickly about how he could exploit that. If he struck for the left, Garth would realize that that was what he was doing, and therefore he could not do that. Instead, Jaime took a breath and leaned back, moved to the right, and then leaned back and straightened before hitting the left. He feinted and bobbed up so he was in Garth's guard. He winked at his friend and then cut across his side, ending with his sword pointing at Garth's throat. "Good," Sir Lyser called out. Jaime moved back from Garth, and the two of them stood there, waiting for Sir Lyser to make the comments he would make. Sir Lyser came to stand before them, dressed in the red and black of House Targaryen, a white flail on his right side indicating what house he is a member of. "Jaime, you did well to recover from the attack that Garth was giving you. However, you were a little late in realizing the opening that Garth's attacks were giving you. You need to keep your eyes on his movements at all times, not just where his sword is." Jaime bit back a retort. He waited for Sir Lyser's comments on Garth's performance. "Garth, you did well. I liked the formation of your attacks, however. As I said before, you must keep your left side guarded as well. Try not to lean too much to the right. Otherwise, well done. Now, Eddard, Arthur, come forward." As Jaime and Garth moved to put their swords back in the right place, Garth whispered, "I'm betting you Arthur wins this one." Jaime looked at his friend and then over his shoulder to where Ned and Arthur were facing up. "I think Ned might win it. He's got a better form for these sorts of things. Arthur doesn't seem to have the patience." Arthur was an amazing swordsman, but there were times when his patience slipped. In the 4 times that he and Ned had fought, Ned had won twice and Arthur once. The other time had been a draw. They put their swords back into the cover, and Garth shook his head. "Arthur's been practicing. He's been coming here every day early in the morning and only leaving when the prince needs him. I think he will win." Jaime thought about that for a moment, silent as they walked back to watch the fight unfold. Ned stood firmly, Arthur stood loosely, then Sorlik called for the fight to begin. They circled one another. Yaxley watched with anticipation, wanting to see how things could go from here. Ned lunged first, a small swing that Arthur blocked easily. Arthur pushed back, and Ned ended up on the back foot, before advancing forward and swinging again. Their swords met in a clang. Ned's left foot was coming forward. He was putting pressure on Arthur here. Ned was bigger than Arthur, but Arthur was quicker on his feet, as he showed when he did a quick switch and was soon on the front foot. "Master Jaime," a voice said behind him, causing Jaime to nearly jump. He turned around and saw Sardib Harold Grandison of the King's Guard standing in front of him. "Yes?" Jaime asked, wondering what a knight of the King's Guard could want from him. Serzier looked slightly uncomfortable. "Her Royal Highness, the Princess Daenerys asked me to remind you of your meeting today." "Well now, Master Jaime." Jaime felt something drop inside him. Of course, he'd said he'd play knights and maidens with Princess Daenerys. How could he have forgotten? He looked over his shoulder to where Ned and Arthur were battering one another, and though a part of him wanted to stay to watch this fight, he also wanted to play with the princess more. "I'm coming now," he said to the knight. He turned to Garth and said, "Let me know how it goes." Garth nodded and Jaime hurried off to meet the princess. Sir Harold, a white shadow behind him. After weaving through the crowd of court in the hallways and corridors, they eventually made it to the princess's rooms, and Jaime knocked. He entered, when she said to come in, and Jaime smiled at her. The princess was wearing a dress of silver, and her hair was tied neatly. Her face was slightly pink. "You look pretty, Dany," Jaime said. Dany smiled. "Thank you. Did you forget about our game against the monster?" Jaime blushed. "No, I was sparring, sorry." Dany waved a hand. "Not to worry. So, do you remember where we were?" Jaime nodded, and he grabbed her hand. "The monster was about to come and get us as we were escaping. The monster appeared before them then and snarled, 'You will never escape my hold. You will remain here for 100 years. Jaime looked at the princess, and together they said, "Never. You will be gone, foul beast." Jaime swung his sword, and the beast moved back, laughing. "You think that is enough to stop me, boy? You know nothing." The monster came forward and the ground shook under their feet. "I will not let you take the princess. Monster, be gone," Jaime said, swinging his sword again. This time he hit the monster and the monster groaned a little. Jaime swung again and the monster fell back. What foul sorcery is this?" the monster asked, his voice sounding pained. "Quickly, sir, we must go before the monster recovers," Dilgy said. Jaime swung his sword once more, and the monster fell back even further. Together, he and Dany ran away from the monster and to safety. When they reached their safe place, Dany beamed at him and cheered. "Yay, the monster is defeated, and we are safe." She turned to him and smiled. "Thank you, my gallant hero." She kissed him on the cheek. And Jaime felt his face heat up slightly. "It was nothing, princess. I was merely doing my duty." Jaime replied when Dany was standing before him, trying to figure out why his face was warm. "You saved me from the greatest monster this realm has ever known. That is no small feat. How could I ever thank you?" the princess asked. Jaime thought for a moment and then launched himself at the princess, tickling her. "Well, you could tell me where the lemon cakes are kept." Dany laughed. Okay, stop. I'll tell you where they are kept." Jaime stopped tickling her and looked at her expectantly. The princess caught her breath and then said, "They're kept in the lower closet of the kitchens, near the chocolate cakes." Jaime grinned. His stomach rumbled. That meant they would be extra cold. Always a good thing. "Thank you, princess," he said before he helped her stand up. "So, what do you want to do now?" "Why, eat lemon cakes, of course," Dany said before walking past him and out of the room. Jaime soon followed. And as they turned and twisted through the corridors and doorways and hallways, he had time to wonder why his face had heated up. It did not matter, really. All that mattered was ensuring they got lemon cakes. They got to the kitchens, and finding them nowhere near as full as they might have otherwise been, they snuck in, coming to a cupboard shaped like a wolf. The princess opened it and gave him a lemon cake, and took one herself. He took a bite and groaned with pleasure. They tasted so nice. The princess did the same. And then she stopped and said, "I'm really happy you're here, Jaime." Jaime smiled at her, and with a mouthful of lemon cake, said, "I am too, Dany." Tywin remembered when King's Landing had sung with joy and life, when King's Landing had been all he could think about and all he could aspire to. He had been young then, young and foolish. He was wiser now. He saw the snakes in the grass, waiting and watching, preparing to pounce on even a trace of weakness. Tywin knew that his father had never understood why he had felt so intoxicated whilst he was here. He knew his brothers did not understand, but Joanna did. She always did, and he missed her. She had written to him to say that things were well in the Rock, but that there were concerning signs of an old enemy coming back to face them. It worried Tywin, though. There was not much he could do about it now. He would need to wait and see, and he had told Joanna this as well. Instead, he focused his attention on the things he could deal with right now. He looked at the officials before him and spoke. "Remind me again, Sir Jasper. What is it exactly that you wish to discuss?" He knew what it was the man wanted to discuss. He wanted to know what to do about those nobles skimping out on taxation payments. But Jasper was a man who often hid the true extent of a problem, and Tywin wanted the man to be open about this. Sir Jasper was a thin man, a weed really, with blonde hair and milky eyes. He looked like an even weaker version of Stafford. His voice was low, though, unusually so. My Lord Hand, the taxation methods are simple enough to understand. This is true, but there are those in the kingdoms who are refusing to contribute the full amount that the Master of Coin states that they should collect. They argue that the methods used to calculate their average tax amount are out of date and needing removal and change. Tywin picked up a letter that had come from Lord Muton in Maidenpool. He snorted. The methods used, they are in keeping with the King's Code of Conduct for tax officials, correct? The King had implemented the code when he had come to the throne, on Tywin's suggestion, as a means of ensuring that the problems of King Aegon's reign did not last. Yes, my Lord Hand, Sir Jasper said. But some nobles like Lord Muton state that those methods are not fair, and that they demand that they be looked at again. Tywin knew that the king would never look at the methods again, unless he thought someone was cheating him badly. Muton and his allies were lucky that the amounts they were refusing to pay were merely in hundreds of dragons and not the thousands. He was tempted to let the matter slide, but he knew that if he did so, it would likely only lead to more lords doing as Muton and Vipern were doing, and that could not be allowed. He took a breath and then said, "Very well, I want it known to all the king's tax collectors that the methods for tax collection are perfectly fine and reasonable, and that anyone who refuses to pay their full amount is to have their name noted down and publicly addressed to the king. Anyone who then refuses to pay the amount they are meant to will have their assets with the crown slowly frozen and their land slowly encroached on until they pay fully." Tywin knew that this method was risky and that it was more rash than perhaps was wise, but it was needed. They could not tolerate anyone taking the crown for a ride. Sir Jasper hesitated for a moment, but then nodded. "Very well, my Lord Hand." "Anything else?" Tywin asked. Sir Jasper shook his head, and Tywin nodded for him to leave. The man got up and walked out. The door had not yet closed when Sir William Sloane, Chief Lieutenant for the Marches, walked in. Sloane was a proud man with a strong build, a known soldier. He was one of Tywin's friends from his time serving as a page for King Aegon. "Sir William, please be seated." The man sat down in the chair recently vacated by Sir Jasper, and Tywin asked him, "What can I do for you?" Sir William smiled. "Well, what I want to know is what does the king intend to do about the Brotherhood? They are getting more and more troublesome on the marches, and they are gaining something of a following amongst the more foolish of the peasantry. I have sent my own men in to counteract this, but the Brotherhood are growing." Tywin hid a sigh behind another letter, this time from Sir Gawain Wild. "The king and Lord Stefan have been in constant communication, and they are working to ensure that the Brotherhood works its way into the trap being set. Trust me, Sir William, when I tell you that the Brotherhood will not be an issue any longer." The knight nodded, though there was something in his bearing that made Tywin think he knew he was lying. Regardless, the knight was silent for a moment and then asked, "And what of the situation with Brovas? Will my men need to remain on high alert for much longer?" Tywin kept his face blank, but inside he was screaming. The king continued to insist that maintaining the embargo against Braavos was worthwhile, even when there were signs that Volantis and Pentos were breaking and were considering their options. The king wanted to make a statement, and he was making it. Whether or not it would be effective was a completely different matter. Tywin took a breath. "Your men will need maybe a few more moons before they can relax, Shura. I know it is a difficult ask, but it is necessary to ensure that things are stable and secure throughout the kingdoms. Braavos is too unpredictable an enemy to relax against." Sir William nodded and then stood up. "Very well, thank you." With that, the man turned and walked out of the room. Tywin thought about the man for a moment and made a note to consider replacements. He would need to see who would replace the old man when his time came. Lord Lieutenant was an important position. Only the best could fill it. As Tywin waited for Paitzel, he turned to Tytos and asked, "Tell me, Tytos, what do you think of Sir Jasper and the taxation situation?" Tytos Brax was a smart boy, but he could be remarkably thick when it came down to it. Here, he was silent. Then in a drawl, he answered, "I think that taxation method is correct, and that the nobles are wrong to refuse to pay their due. However, I do think that there is another way to get them to pay." Intrigued, Tywin asked, "And what way is that?" Brax's cheeks turned red. "I would slip in one or two changes to the taxation rates without them knowing. I do not think any of the lords really look at the changes in the system. I know my father does not. If you made the changes discreetly, then they would never know, and would probably start paying the rate of taxation they were meant to be paying anyway. Tywin thought on this for a moment. It was smart, and he had considered it, but there was only one way to handle someone like Moten. Still, he was curious to see why Tydos had reached this conclusion. And why do you think they would pay the actual rate more willingly, if this was the approach that was taken? Brax's cheeks darkened in color. Because many of the lords are reluctant to part with their money. This is a well-known fact. However, from what I have seen, they are less likely to protest an increase if they think it is not noticeable. For example, if their rate went up by 99 pennies, they are going to think they are getting a good deal and cough up more. Tywin nodded. He knew that line of thinking. Indeed, he had discussed that very argument with its creator, Maester Marwyn. I see, and if there are lords who do actually look at their tax sheets and see this change and still refuse to pay, what then? Merwin had given a decent answer when Tywin had asked him this same question. Here, though, Tydos was fumbling. His words were not coming out, and Tywin had the impression he had not yet read that far in Merwin's treatise. As Brax continued to stumble around, Tywin eventually answered for him. If they notice that there has been a rise and they refuse to pay, you do as I have suggested, be done already. You remind them of what they must lose by refusing to pay. If they still refuse to pay, then you act on your reminder. You take away their sources of income, and you take it for the crown. You make them poor, and you leave them begging for mercy. It is the only way to make a truculent child realize that he has been wrong. Tydos' face fell at that, and the color seemingly drained from his face. Tywin recalled who the boy's father was, and knew why that had happened. Andros Brax had had the same look on his face when Tywin had ordered the complete and utter destruction of houses. Rhaenon, Tarbeck, the Brax family were not cut out for such ruthlessness. Thankfully, Pycelle decided to enter the room then, and Brax disappeared into a corner. Tywin fixed his gaze on Pycelle, saying nothing, allowing Pycelle to fidget on his chair for a time. When he was satisfied that Pycelle was suitably on edge, he spoke. What word has there been from the Citadel? They have agreed to send Qyburn over to King's Landing to stand before the King's judgment. Pycelle said, they have agreed to hand over his works as well for inspection by yourself and His Majesty, the King. Pycelle's face fell then, and Tywin knew his suspicions had been confirmed. They have also agreed to send over several manuscripts that were requested by the king. Good, Tywin said, pleased. The Citadel were finally coming to heel, and he knew then that with a little bit more pressure, they might be able to exert some proper control over that rogue element of Westeros. And what about the Conclave? Have they reached a decision about their rules and regulations? That was one of the things that had always angered him about the Citadel. For a group that demanded absolute openness about everything, they were surprisingly closed off about allowing people into their inner sanctum. Pycelle shifted, and the chair groaned. They have agreed that old records shall be released. And they will also release the records from the past year, Tywin pressed. He wished to identify a pattern. He could not do that without all the records. Pycelle's head shook. No, unfortunately not, my lord. They have said that doing so would break King Garth's law about maintaining records from a fresh meeting for at least 5 years before releasing them. You reminded them, of course, that King Garth's law was repealed by the Movement Law passed during the reign of King Maekar, and again during the reign of King Jaehaerys II. Tywin pressed, I did, my lord, but they refuse to budge. They insist that these documents are protected under Garth's law, Pycelle said. Pycelle was lying. Tywin knew he was, but he was not sure why. Regardless, he would use his source in the Citadel to get those documents anyway. Deciding to change the topic, he said, I have not had word from our friends in the Aerie. Have they decided against following through with what we agreed? Pycelle's face turned white. Very white. No, my lord hand. They have not. But it is the Aerie and Jon Arryn's control over it is absolute. I would not be surprised if they had decided to hold back for the time being whilst things calmed down. Tywin nodded. Good. We would not want them to have gotten cold feet. And how is our friend in the Aerie getting on with ensuring that Lord Arryn cannot truly interfere with our plans? Pycelle's shoulders straightened, then, very well, it seems that Lady Arryn has fallen ill once more, and this time it seems as though it might be the final nail for them. Young Elbert is coming along promisingly, and as such will no doubt be a very fine lord. Tywin acknowledged this with a slight tilt of his head. Are you hearing this, Ranal? I am keeping my promise to you. Now then, the issue of ensuring that there is proper funding for the schools that we need to continue to develop the kingdoms. You have spoken to those of your friends in the Citadel to ensure they are still willing to come and teach. I have, my lord hand. They are still willing, and they are definitely going to be ensuring that they bring their knowledge and expertise with them, Pyxell said happily. Good. I want to be kept updated on every development that comes from this as time goes by. Tywin said, standing up. He shook hands with Pyxell, watched as the man walked out of the room, and then made his own way out of the Tower of the Hand. Titus accompanied him as far as the drawbridge before he told the boy to go and get some rest. He would not need a squire where he was going. He nodded to courtiers as he passed them. Their names were there in his mind. Lord Osiark, distant cousin, no doubt there to petition the king about his inheritance. Lord Peake, a constant fixture, Lord Merryweather. A rambling old fool, Lord Wind, a smart and bold man, and Lady Dane, a curious lady who was not the ruling lady in her own right, but was present at the Red Keep with her husband, away on the king's business. Tywin walked through passageways adorned with paintings of dragons and thieves. There were dancing dreamers on the walls as well, and soon enough, Tywin relaxed enough to nod to his guards to stay at the doors. He walked into the room and came to stand next to the hooded figure. It is in place. Pyxell has given me the information, he said softly. Good, the hooded figure said. We are alone? We are, Tywin replied. The hooded figure pulled their hood down and silver hair cascaded down. Tywin bowed before the queen and listened as she spoke. We are running thin on time, Tywin. Soon we shall need to make our move, and I need to know that Jon Arryn will be gone before he can cause too much trouble. I do not know if he will be gone in the purest sense of the word, your grace, but I do know that he will be too concerned with trying to figure out why he never has any heirs of his own body to be involved in outside politics. Elbert Arryn is coming along well, and Daenerys Arryn is ensuring that our interests are being looked after in Gulltown, Tywin said. And the girl? Did we need to use the burned men to cause that disruption? The queen asked, a tint of concern in her voice. Tywin wished he could do as he had done when they were younger and lay a comforting hand on the queen's shoulder, but she was the queen now, and so he remained respectful. The girl was crucial to the plan. Your grace, the girl would ensure that the men of the Vale are too busy fighting and killing the clans to realize their master is slipping away from them. It pains me to know she is with a savage, but it needed to be done. The queen sighed. I suppose you are right. Still, it does not make me sleep easier at night. There was a brief silence, and then she spoke again. The king will want to know soon enough. He already knows the barest bones of the plot, but he will need to know everything. And I think we should tell him. Tell him before something else happens to take his attention away from what matters. Tywin nodded. He knew what Axe was like, and he knew just how many ideas and plans lay scattered across the king's solar in forgotten corners, going gray. I will make sure that everything is ready, and Borden, so that when he is told, nothing is amiss. The queen smiled. Thank you, Tywin. You have been of great help. Tywin bowed his head. It is my honor to serve. As to the Brotherhood, I received reliable information that they will be meeting at the Scepted Remembrance on the Street of Fire in 3 days. They will be accompanied by a knight who once tried to court me. If you were to send men there in plain colors and have them deal with the Brotherhood as well as the knight, then that would be most useful. The queen whispered. Tywin was surprised. He had always thought the queen had some small affection for Ser Bonifer, but apparently not. It was not his duty to question regardless, and so, he said, I will ensure that it is done, and that it is done quietly. Thank you, the queen said, before holding out her hand. Tywin kissed it and then turned and walked out of the room. Nodding to his guards, he made the journey back to the Tower of the Hand. Once he was back in his rooms, he summoned Daemon, the captain of his household guard. When his cousin stood before him, he said, In 3 days' time, you are to go to the Scepted Remembrance on the Street of Fire with 10 soldiers and 30 men of the guard, dressed in plain clothes. And you are to find the Brotherhood and kill them, as well as anyone who tries to stop you. His cousin did not even blink. Very well, I shall tell the men to sharpen their weapons. Tywin nodded and waved a hand dismissing his cousin. Once his cousin was gone, he took a breath and slumped down in his chair. He needed to sleep, but he needed to write some letters first. It was going to be a while before he could rest easy.
Thank you for listening to the story. If you enjoyed this reimagined story and audiobook style presentation, feel free to like and subscribe for more content like this. New stories and alternate scenarios are updated regularly. Now see you in the next video.